Elena's scream tore through the darkness like a wound that wouldn't close. "Leo! Please, somebody help my baby." Her blind 7-year-old son stood frozen on the subway tracks, unable to see the train barreling toward him through the blackout, unable to see his mother reaching desperately toward him from the platform, unable to see anything at all because the same explosion that killed his father 3 years ago had stolen his sight forever. And now it was about to steal his life. Then came the dog. Not some gentle family pet, but a battle-scarred shadow with eyes that held more pain than any animal should carry, moving through the darkness like it had been born for this exact moment. Before Elena could even finish her prayer, before the train's headlights could illuminate the horror about to unfold, that massive creature slammed into Leo with the force of salvation itself, pinning the boy into a safety niche just as tons of steel screamed past inches from their bodies. When the world stopped shaking and Elena finally reached them, Leo wasn't crying. He was whispering into the scarred dog's ear, his small fingers touching the animal's face with wonder. "He knew where to go, Mommy. He's been waiting for me." Elena looked at this stranger who'd saved her son, this wounded warrior with a mysterious collar and eyes that seemed almost human in their intelligence, and she knew with absolute certainty that nothing about tonight was an accident. Not the blackout. Not Leo wandering onto those tracks. And definitely not this dog who appeared from nowhere to guard the one thing she had left in this world. Her blind son. Her miracle. Her reason to keep fighting through 3 years of crushing poverty and medical bills and questions about her husband's death that nobody would answer. "An angel found me in the dark," Leo whispered, and Elena felt tears streaming down her face because maybe, just maybe, her little boy was right. If you believe in miracles, type "angel" in the comments, because what happens next will restore your faith in impossible things. The alarm clock's shrill beep cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 4:47 a.m., 3 minutes before Elena had said it, but she was already awake. She had been awake for hours, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a spreading bruise, listening to Leo's breathing in the next room, counting the hours until the next bill came due. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when her mind kept replaying the same questions that had haunted her for 3 years. Why had Marcus gone to that testing facility alone? What had he discovered in those final minutes before the explosion tore through Building 7? And why did Thorn Industries pay her settlement in 3 installments of silence? She moved through their cramped apartment like a ghost, her footsteps memorized to avoid the creaking floorboard that would wake Leo. The kitchen was barely 6 feet wide, the kind of space where you could touch both walls at once if you stretched. She opened the refrigerator to a landscape of almost empty. 1 egg, half a carton of milk that expired tomorrow, a heel of bread. Wednesday. 2 more days until her paycheck, if she could make it through her double shift without collapsing. The medical bills were stacked on the counter in order of urgency, red letters screaming from the top envelope. Past due. Final notice. She'd been rotating which ones to pay, a terrible juggling act where dropping any ball meant losing everything. Leo's vision therapy, $340. The specialist appointment they'd canceled twice already, $275. The adaptive learning tools his school required, $180. And underneath it all, the settlement agreement she'd signed 3 years ago, promising never to investigate the explosion, never to question the official report, never to suggest that Thorn Industries had been anything but generous to the widow of a man who died in their facility. Marcus's death certificate sat in the drawer beneath the bills. Cause: industrial accident. But Marcus had been a safety engineer, the kind of man who checked everything twice, who never cut corners, who came home every night talking about protocol and procedure like they were prayers. The official investigation had closed in 6 days, ruled it an equipment malfunction, sealed the records. 6 days to bury a man's death and a company's liability. She made Leo's breakfast with the precision of a surgeon, measuring out his medication by feel in the half-darkness. 1 pill for the residual inflammation in his optic nerves. 1 for the phantom pain he still felt behind his eyes. 1 for the anxiety that made him wake up screaming about fire and smoke and his father's voice calling his name. The pills rattled in their bottles like tiny accusations. The photograph on the refrigerator caught the first rays of morning light through the grimy window. Marcus in his Thorn Industries uniform, Leo perched on his shoulders with both eyes open and seeing, both of them laughing at something Elena had said behind the camera. That was 4 months before the explosion. 4 months before their lives detonated along with Building 7. She touched Marcus's face through the plastic photo sleeve, and her finger came away dusty. "Mommy?" Leo's voice drifted from his bedroom, small and uncertain in the darkness he would never escape. "Is it morning? I had the dream again." Elena closed her eyes, swallowed the grief that rose in her throat like bile, and walked toward her son's room wearing the smile he couldn't see but could always hear in her voice. "It's morning, baby. I'm right here." But even as she said it, she wondered how much longer she could keep that promise, how many more mornings she had before the weight of their quiet desperation finally crushed them both. The dog was waiting outside their building when they emerged from the subway station, as if he'd known exactly where they lived. Elena's first instinct was to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't seen the massive shadow sitting beneath the broken streetlight, but Leo's hand tightened around hers with an urgency that stopped her mid-step. "He's here," Leo whispered, his face turning toward the animal with that uncanny awareness blind children develop, reading the world through sound and sensation. "He followed us home, Mommy. He wants to stay." "Baby, we can't," Elena began, but the words died in her throat as she looked at the dog properly for the first time outside the chaos of the subway. In the dim glow of their building's flickering entrance light, she could see the full extent of his scars. Burns, deep and old, running along his right flank. A notch missing from one ear. And that collar, that strange synthetic collar with its barely visible serial number and what looked like a small electronic port embedded in the material. This wasn't some abandoned pet. This was something else entirely. The dog stood when they approached, positioning himself between them and the street with military precision. His eyes never stopped moving, scanning the empty sidewalk, the dark windows across the street, the alley entrance where the homeless sometimes gathered. Watching. Protecting. "Mrs. Vance." The voice made Elena jump. Mr. Kowalski, their building superintendent, emerged from the entrance with his arms crossed, his perpetual scowl deepening as he eyed the dog. "You know the rules? No pets. Especially not something that size. That thing's a lawsuit waiting to happen." Elena opened her mouth to explain, to apologize, to promise she'd take the dog to a shelter in the morning, but Leo spoke first, his voice carrying a certainty she'd never heard from him before. "He saved my life, Mr. Kowalski. In the subway. When I was on the tracks." The superintendent's expression flickered with something that might have been sympathy, but rules were rules in buildings where one violation could cascade into eviction. "I'm sorry about what happened, kid, but—" The dog's growl cut him off. Low, rumbling, barely audible but unmistakable. Not aimed at Kowalski but at something behind him. Elena followed the animal's gaze to a black sedan parked across the street, its engine running, windows tinted so dark they looked like pools of oil. She'd seen that car before weeks ago, idling outside Leo's school. And again near the diner where she worked. She told herself it was paranoia, the kind of hypervigilance that came from losing everything once and living in terror of it happening again. But the dog knew better. The sedan's engine revved once, then pulled away slowly, deliberately, as if making sure they saw it leave. The dog's growl faded only after the taillights disappeared around the corner. He sat back down on their stoop, resuming his vigil, and Elena felt ice spread through her chest. "On second thought," Kowalski said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the empty space where the sedan had been, "maybe having a dog around isn't the worst idea. Just keep him quiet. And if anyone asks, I didn't see nothing." He disappeared back into the building before Elena could respond, leaving them standing in the cold with their uninvited guardian. That night, Elena tried 3 times to coax the dog inside their apartment, but he refused to cross the threshold. Instead, he positioned himself in the hallway directly in front of their door, his body a living barricade. She brought him water and the leftover meatloaf from the diner that was supposed to be tomorrow's dinner. He ate carefully, efficiently, never taking his eyes off the stairwell. Leo sat beside him on the floor, his small fingers exploring the dog's collar with fascination. "There's something here, Mommy," he said, tracing the electronic port. "Something important. I can feel it humming." Elena knelt beside her son, studying the collar more closely. The serial number was partially visible now, TCK9-073. Thorn Corporation. The same company that had killed her husband and blinded her son. The same company whose black sedan had just been watching their building. "What's your name?" Leo whispered to the dog, his voice carrying into the empty hallway. The animal turned his massive head, and for a moment, something passed between the boy and the beast, a recognition that transcended words. "Bane," Leo said with absolute certainty, though no one had told him. "His name is Bane. And he's been looking for us for a very long time." Silas Thorne was watching the evening news with a glass of scotch when his entire world tilted sideways. The broadcast showed shaky cell phone footage from the subway blackout, commuters being evacuated, emergency lights strobing through darkness, and there for exactly 4 seconds, a dog pulling a blind child away from oncoming train. The camera was unfocused, the lighting terrible, but Thorne's hand froze halfway to his mouth as recognition slammed into him like a freight train. TCK9-073. Project Cerberus. The prototype that was supposed to be dead. He rewound the footage 3 times, his pulse accelerating with each viewing. The gait was unmistakable, that specific biomechanical efficiency they'd spent 18 months programming into the animal's muscle memory. The tactical positioning. The way it scanned the environment even while protecting the child. And that collar? Jesus Christ, that collar with its encrypted black box still intact, still recording, still storing every piece of data from the day Marcus Vance died. Thorne's office at the top of the Thorne Industries Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, but he saw none of it now. His reflection in the darkened glass showed a man who'd built an empire on military contracts and private security, who'd learned that success meant burying your mistakes deep enough that they'd never surface. He'd buried Project Cerberus 3 years ago in the same explosion that killed its handler. 2 birds, 1 stone. The perfect accident. Except it hadn't been perfect at all. He pulled up the incident report from that day, the one he'd personally overseen and sealed. Subject: Marcus Vance, safety engineer. Cause of death: catastrophic failure in testing facility 7. Collateral damage: 1 experimental K9 unit, TCK9-073, believed destroyed in blast. Case closed. Record sealed. Families compensated into silence. But Marcus hadn't died because of equipment failure. He died because he'd discovered what they were really testing in Building 7, combat AI integrated into living tissue, black box data recorders surgically implanted in service animals, corporate espionage dressed up as military innovation. Marcus had threatened to go to the federal authorities. So Thorne had made a choice, the kind of choice that kept empires standing and whistleblowers quiet. He'd ordered the blast himself. Remote detonation. 14 seconds of fire that erased a man and his evidence. The dog was supposed to die too. The organic hard drive turned to ash along with its handler. They'd found burned remains in the kennel facility, DNA too degraded to analyze fully. He'd signed off on the destruction order and moved on. But now that ghost was alive, walking the streets, and worse, it was with Marcus Vance's family. The widow. The blind son. The same people who'd signed settlement agreements promising never to investigate. If they discovered what that collar contained, if they accessed the encrypted footage from the day of the explosion, if they heard Marcus's final words recorded in digital memory. Thorne's phone was in his hand before the thought finished forming. Security. I need a full surveillance package deployed immediately. He read off the address from the news caption, that rundown tenement in the Lower East Side where Elena Vance had been barely surviving on his blood money. The targets are a woman, a blind child, and a German Shepherd mix. I want eyes on them 24/7. And find out who else knows that dog is alive. Sir? His head of security hesitated. What's the priority here? Thorne watched his reflection in the window, seeing not the respectable CO but the man who'd murdered an employee and called it an accident. Asset recovery. That animal is Thorne Corporation property containing classified data. I want it back in containment before anyone realizes what it is. And if the family resists? The question hung in the air like smoke. Thorne thought about Elena Vance, working double shifts at a diner to feed her blind son, living in the ruins he'd created. He thought about the settlement agreement, the legal barriers he'd constructed, the paper trail that made him untouchable. Then he thought about what was at stake: his company, his reputation, his freedom, and made the same choice he always made when something threatened his empire. The Child Protective Services reports we've been monitoring show concerning patterns. Single mother, unstable housing, now harboring a dangerous stray animal. I think it's time someone filed an official complaint about the boy's welfare. For his own safety, of course. He ended the call and poured another scotch, but his hand was shaking. On the news, they were replaying the footage, calling the dog a hero, calling it a miracle. They had no idea they were watching a weapon, a witness, a ticking time bomb that could destroy everything he'd built. Project Cerberus had come back from the dead, and it had found the one family that could weaponize its secrets. Thorne stared at the frozen image of the dog's eyes reflecting the camera flash, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt something close to fear. The first phone call came at 2:17 a.m., 3 days after Bain refused to leave their doorstep. Elena fumbled for her cell phone in the darkness, her heart already racing because calls at that hour only meant one thing: disaster. Mrs. Vance. The voice was professional, female, unfamiliar. This is regarding your son's welfare. We've received some concerning reports. What reports? Who is this? The line went dead before she could finish the question. When she tried to call back, the number showed as disconnected. She sat in the dark holding the silent phone, listening to Bain's low growl from the hallway, and felt the first tremor of something worse than poverty closing in around them. The second call came during her breakfast shift at the diner. Her manager Cal handed her the phone with an expression she couldn't read, something between pity and self-preservation. Someone asking about your situation at home. Said they were from Child Protective Services. Elena's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the receiver. My son is fine. Who gave you this number? Ma'am, we're just following up on an anonymous complaint about unsafe living conditions and an aggressive animal in the home. We'll need to schedule a home visit. There's no aggressive animal. He saved my son's life. According to our records, you're housing an unregistered stray dog of significant size with a child who has special needs. We take these reports very seriously, Mrs. Vance. Someone will be in contact to arrange an inspection. The breakfast rush blurred into a nightmare of dropped orders and wrong change. Elena burned her hand on the coffee pot, mixed up table numbers, forgot to ring in a check. Cal pulled her aside during the lunch prep, his face wearing the same expression her building superintendent had when he'd raised the rent: apologetic inevitability. Elena, you know I think the world of you, but I got 3 different customers today asking if you're the woman with the dangerous dog. One lady said her sister saw it on Nextdoor, said there's a whole thread about it. People saying it attacked someone in the subway, that it's unstable, that you're putting the neighborhood at risk. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Corporates worried about liability. If something happens, if that dog hurts someone. He wouldn't. Cal, please, I need this job. I'm sorry. I really am. But I got a business to protect. The severance envelope felt like a death certificate in her hands. 2 weeks' pay. Enough to cover maybe half of next month's rent. She walked home through streets that suddenly felt hostile, seeing her neighbors differently now. Mrs. Chin, who used to smile at Leo, crossed to the other side of the street. The bodega owner where she bought their groceries had a new sign in his window: no dogs allowed, no exceptions. The apartment building lobby had changed too. Someone had printed flyers, cheap paper with cheaper ink, showing a grainy photo of Bain. Dangerous animal in building 3C. Residents demand removal for safety of our children. Petition at superintendent's office. Elena ripped one down, her hands trembling with rage and terror. 17 signatures already, including families she'd known for 2 years, parents whose children played in the same courtyard where Leo sat alone. Bain was waiting in his usual spot outside their door, but something was different. His muzzle was bleeding, fresh scratches across his scarred face. Leo sat beside him, tears streaming down his cheeks, his small hands trying to staunch the bleeding with his shirt. They threw bottles at him. Mommy, Leo sobbed. From the windows. Called him a monster. Called me a freak for keeping him. And Bane just stood there and took it because he knew if he fought back, they'd take him away from me. Elena sank to the floor beside them, gathering her son in her arms while Bane pressed against them both, still protecting even as he bled. The fluorescent hallway light hummed overhead, casting everything in sick yellow tones. From somewhere below, she could hear the superintendent's voice discussing the dog situation with someone, the words eviction and safety hazard drifting up through the building's thin walls. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. She didn't answer, but the voicemail came through seconds later. Mrs. Vance, this is Dr. Morrison from Leo's school. We need to discuss concerns about your home environment affecting his emotional stability. Several parents have expressed discomfort with his return while you're harboring an aggressive stray. For the safety of all students, we're requesting he remain home until this situation is resolved. Leo couldn't hear the message, but he felt his mother's body go rigid against him. Are they taking me away? He whispered into the terrible silence. Are they taking Bane? Elena looked at the dog who'd saved her son's life, at the blood on his muzzle from defending them without fighting back, at the petition demanding his removal, at the severance check that wouldn't cover their bills, at the child in her arms who'd already lost so much. No one's taking anyone, she said, her voice steady even as her world collapsed. But she didn't know how to keep that promise, and Bane's intelligent eyes suggested he didn't either. Elena had been gone exactly 47 minutes when the knock came. Leo was practicing his Braille homework at the kitchen table, his fingers moving across the dots with concentration, while Bane lay at his feet in that position he always took, close enough to touch, angled toward the door, always watching. Mrs. Chen from downstairs had agreed to check on Leo during Elena's job interview, guilt perhaps for crossing the street days earlier, but she was late, stuck on a delayed train according to her text. The knock came again, harder this time. Official. Leo's fingers stilled on the raised paper. Who is it? His voice came out smaller than he wanted, swallowed by the apartment's thin walls and thinner safety. Building maintenance, son. Checking the radiators before winter. The voice was smooth, practiced, but Bane's growl said otherwise. Low and continuous, a warning Leo had learned to read like Braille. My mom said not to open the door for anyone. We'll just be a minute. Your super sent us. Got the keys right here. The sound of metal scraping in the lock made Leo's heart hammer against his ribs. Bane was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between Leo and the door with that mechanical precision that Elena called unnatural and Leo called miraculous. The boy's hand found the dog's collar, fingers tracing the strange electronic port he'd memorized through touch. The door burst open before the lock fully turned, kicked, not keyed. Leo heard it in the splintering wood, felt it in the way Bane's body coiled like a spring. 2 sets of footsteps, heavy and purposeful. Not maintenance workers. Hunters. Easy now, the first voice said, different now, stripped of its fake courtesy. We're just here for the dog. Nobody needs to get hurt. TCK 9-073, the second voice read off something, probably a photo. 3 years missing. Asset recovery only. Sedate and extract. Leo's fingers tightened on Bane's collar, and something extraordinary happened. He felt it through his palm, a vibration from the electronic port like the collar was communicating directly through his touch. Images flooded his mind, not sight exactly but something his brain translated into understanding. The apartment layout. 2 men, one by the door with a tranquilizer gun, one circling left toward the kitchen. The fire escape window partially open for air. 7 steps away. 4 seconds to reach it. He didn't question how he knew. He just moved. Now! Leo shouted and Bane exploded into action. Not attacking but clearing path. The dog's shoulder caught the first man's knee, sending him sprawling, the tranquilizer gun skittering across the floor. The second man lunged for Leo, but Bane was already there, jaws clamping on the sleeve of an expensive suit jacket, yanking the man off balance. Leo ran. His hands hit the window frame exactly where the vibration had told him it would be, muscle memory of an apartment he'd navigated blind for 2 years merging with something else, something impossible. Bane was beside him instantly, the dog's body a bridge between boy and fire escape, guiding without dragging, protecting without controlling. God damn it, the kid's rabbiting. One of the men recovered, footsteps pounding toward them. Forget the gentle approach. But they were already through the window. Leo's feet found the fire escape's metal grating, Bane's weight steady against his leg, and they were moving down, Leo's hands on the railing that his fingers had touched 1,000 times in darkness but never while running for his life. The connection to Bane intensified with each step, the collar's vibration painting a map in his mind. 3 flights down, turn left at the landing, avoid the broken step on the 2nd floor. Behind them, the men were following, cursing and calling into radios. Subjects fleeing south on fire escape. Need containment at ground level. They hit the alley at full speed. Leo stumbled on the uneven pavement, but Bane caught him, the dog's body a living guide rail steering him right, then left, then into a narrow gap between dumpsters that Leo's seeing eyes would never have found. They pressed into the shadows, Leo's chest heaving, his hands still locked on that collar, still receiving impossible information. 2 more men in the street beyond. Black sedan idling at the corner. Escape route through the basement access tunnel that connected to the subway station 3 blocks away. Leo didn't know how he knew this. The collar's vibration seemed to be feeding him data, 3 years of Bane's reconnaissance of their neighborhood compressed into survival instinct. We have to keep moving, Leo whispered into Bane's ear, and felt the dog's agreement in the tension of muscles beneath scarred fur. They ran through darkness, boy and beast, connected by something neither could explain but both trusted absolutely. Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket during the interview. Mrs. Chen's panicked voice. The door's broken, they're gone, Elena, the police are here, and Elena was already running, her resume scattered on the office floor behind her, racing toward a home that was no longer safe, toward a son who'd learned to see through a dog's eyes, toward a war she hadn't known they were fighting until it had already begun. The court hearing happened so fast Elena barely had time to comprehend it was real. 72 hours after the break-in, which the police report mysteriously labeled as a wellness check gone wrong, she sat in family court with a public defender who looked fresh out of law school and utterly terrified of the legal team sitting across the aisle. 3 lawyers. All from Whitmore and Associates, the firm that handled Thorne Industries litigation. All wearing suits that cost more than Elena's annual rent. And standing behind them, arms crossed like a general surveying a battlefield, was Silas Thorne himself. He'd never come to court for the settlement negotiations after Marcus died. He'd sent subordinates then, kept his hands clean. But today he was here, his presence a message she couldn't ignore. This mattered to him personally. Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed the emergency petition with an expression Elena couldn't read. The courtroom smelled like furniture polish and old law books and the particular despair of families being torn apart by bureaucratic efficiency. Your Honor, the lead attorney began, his voice smooth as silk over razor wire, Child Protective Services has documented concerning patterns in Mrs. Vance's home. Unstable employment. Substandard housing. And most critically, the presence of an aggressive stray animal with a documented history of violence. That's not true, Elena started, but her lawyer's hand on her arm silenced her. The attorney produced a folder thick with fabricated nightmares. Photos of their broken apartment door, captioned as evidence of animal aggression. Statements from neighbors Elena had never spoken to, claiming Bane had lunged at children in the hallway. A veterinary report from a doctor Elena had never visited, declaring the dog behaviorally unstable and unsuitable for home environment, particularly with a disabled child. The animal in question is unregistered, unvaccinated, and of unknown origin, the attorney continued. Mrs. Vance has refused multiple requests from animal control to surrender it for evaluation. She's prioritizing her attachment to a dangerous stray over her son's safety. Elena watched the judge's face, searching for mercy and finding only exhaustion. How many cases like this had Morrison seen? How many desperate mothers sitting in that same chair, fighting systems designed to grind them down? Mrs. Vance, Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd stopped believing in good outcomes, do you have employment currently? I'm between positions. Yes or no, please. No, Your Honor, but... And you're behind on rent by how many months? Elena's lawyer whispered the answer he'd gotten from her building superintendent. 3 months, Your Honor. The courtroom felt like it was shrinking, walls pressing in. Leo sat beside her in his dress shirt that was too small, his sunglasses hiding the eyes that would never see this nightmare unfold, his hand locked around Elena's wrist so tight she could feel his pulse racing against her skin. And regarding the animal, Morrison continued, you understand that maintaining an unregistered dog of significant size violates both your building's lease and city ordinances regarding stray animals? He saved my son's life. I'm not questioning the animal's past actions, Mrs. Vance. I'm concerned about present dangers. Do you have documentation proving this dog has received rabies vaccination, behavioral assessment, or proper veterinary care? The silence was her answer. She tried 3 different vets, but none would see Bain without proof of ownership, and the collar around his neck belonged to Thorne Industries, which meant proving ownership meant admitting he was stolen property. Thorne's attorney sensed blood in the water. Your Honor, we're not suggesting Mrs. Vance is intentionally negligent. We believe she's experiencing mental health challenges common to trauma survivors. Poor judgment, inability to assess risk, prioritizing emotional comfort over practical safety. Her late husband's death, her son's disability, the financial stress. It's created a perfect storm of instability. The child deserves better. What are you proposing? Morrison asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Temporary custody transfer to a licensed foster facility while Mrs. Vance receives psychiatric evaluation and addresses her housing situation. Once she's demonstrated stability, steady employment, safe housing, removal of the animal, reunification can be discussed. The words landed like physical blows. Foster care. Psychiatric evaluation. Removal of the animal. Elena felt Leo's grip on her wrist tighten until his fingers went white. I'm not crazy, Elena said, her voice breaking. I'm poor. There's a difference, Your Honor. I know I've made mistakes, but taking my son... Mrs. Vance, the judge interrupted gently, and that gentleness was worse than anger. I believe you love your son very much. But love alone doesn't ensure safety. The court's primary obligation is to Leo's welfare. Leo's voice cut through the proceedings, high and clear and absolutely certain. I want to stay with my mom. And I want to stay with Bain. He's the only one who helps me see. Judge Morrison's expression softened fractionally, but Elena saw the decision already forming in her eyes. The legal system didn't care about miracles or bonds that transcended species. It cared about documentation, about stability, about mothers who could prove they deserved their children on paper. I'm ordering temporary custody transfer, effective immediately, Morrison announced, her gavel already rising. Mrs. Vance, you'll have supervised visitation rights pending psychiatric evaluation and housing assessment. The animal must be surrendered to city animal control within 24 hours. The gavel fell. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Leo started screaming. The woman was waiting outside the family court building when Elena emerged, her world shattered into pieces too small to gather. Leo had been taken screaming from her arms by a social worker with kind eyes and iron hands, loaded into a van heading to a foster facility in Queens. Elena had collapsed on the courthouse steps, unable to breathe, unable to think beyond the sound of her son's voice calling for her, calling for Bain, calling for someone to make the nightmare stop. Mrs. Vance. The voice was quiet, urgent, female. I don't have much time. Neither do you. Elena looked up through tears to see a woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled back, wearing a lab coat under a threadbare winter jacket. Her hands shook as she clutched a manila envelope like it contained something explosive. Who are you? Dr. Rachel Fisk. I worked at Thorne Industries. Building 7. The woman glanced over her shoulder at the black sedan idling across the street, the same one that had been watching their apartment for weeks. I was the lead behavioral scientist on Project Cerberus. I need you to understand what that dog is before they kill him to cover their tracks. Elena's grief crystallized into focus. Tell me. Dr. Fisk sat beside her on the cold concrete steps, the envelope between them like a confession. 3 years ago, Thorn Industries developed a program to create biological black boxes, living data recorders for military and corporate operations. We surgically implanted encrypted storage devices into K9 units, turned them into walking surveillance systems. Audio, video, tactical data, all stored in neural-linked hardware. Marcus died in Building 7. Elena's voice was hollow. Your husband discovered what we were really doing. We told the military we were developing advanced service dogs. But Thorn was using them for industrial espionage, corporate sabotage, off-book operations that would destroy him if they came to light. Marcus found the real project files. He was going to expose everything. The pieces aligned with terrible clarity. So Thorn killed him. The explosion was remotely triggered. 14 seconds of fire to erase a whistleblower and destroy the evidence. TCK-9-073, Bain, was in the facility that day. Marcus was his handler. They were bonded. Dr. Fisk's voice cracked. We thought the dog died too. Thorn ordered us to confirm destruction. But the DNA we tested was from another animal, a control subject. Bain must have escaped in the chaos. Elena stared at the envelope, understanding dawning like nausea. The collar contains encrypted footage from the day of the explosion. Marcus's final words. Thorn's voice on the communication system ordering the detonation. 3 years of evidence stored in neural-linked memory, waiting for someone to access it. Dr. Fisk pressed the envelope into Elena's hands. This contains the decryption codes and access protocols. But Elena, Thorn knows what that dog is carrying. That's why he took your son. He's betting you'll trade the dog for Leo's return. Leo was there. The realization hit Elena like a second explosion. The day Marcus died. I brought Leo to the facility because our babysitter canceled. He was in the observation room when the blast that killed your husband sent shrapnel through the viewing window. That's what blinded Leo. Not a random accident. Your son lost his sight because Silas Thorn murdered his father. Elena couldn't breathe. 3 years of settlement money, of signing papers promising never to investigate, of living in poverty while Thorn's company profited from weapons built on her husband's corpse. And Leo, her beautiful blind boy, carrying the physical scars of corporate murder every day of his life. Why are you telling me this now? Because I can't live with it anymore. I falsified the reports. I helped Thorn bury the evidence. I took his money and stayed quiet while you suffered. Dr. Fisk stood, her lab coat flapping in the November wind. But I draw the line at letting him kill that dog and keep your son. Bain found you for a reason, Elena. Marcus trained him to protect what mattered most. That's why he saved Leo in the subway. That's why he won't leave. He's still trying to complete his final mission, keeping Marcus's family safe. The black sedan's doors opened. Men in suits emerged, moving toward them with purpose. Access the collar's data, Dr. Fisk said quickly, backing away. There's a journalist named Sarah Chin who's been investigating Thorn for years. Give her the evidence. But Elena, once you decrypt that collar, Thorn will know. He'll come for Bain with everything he has. You'll have maybe 12 hours before he disappears your proof permanently. Where is Bain now? Animal control facility on Randall's Island. Scheduled for euthanasia tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. They're calling it a mercy killing for an aggressive stray. Dr. Fisk's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. For everything we did to your family. Your husband was a good man. He deserved better than what we. The men in suits grabbed Dr. Fisk before she could finish. She didn't resist, just locked eyes with Elena one final time as they dragged her toward the sedan. The envelope remained on the courthouse steps, its contents promising either salvation or destruction. Elena picked it up with shaking hands. Inside were technical schematics, access codes, and a USB drive labeled Cerberus Protocol for Marcus's family. Also a business card. Sarah Chin, investigative journalist, with a phone number written in hasty pen. 12 hours until they killed Bain. 24 hours until her next supervised visit with Leo. And somewhere in the encrypted data locked inside a dog's collar was the truth that could destroy the man who'd murdered her husband and stolen her son. Elena pulled out her phone and dialed Sarah Chen's number. When the journalist answered, Elena's voice was steady for the first time in 3 years. I have a story for you. And evidence that's going to bury Silas Thorne. The phone call shattered Elena's night at 11:47 p.m. Sarah Chen's voice was raw with panic. They took Leo from the foster home. Black vans, no badges. Elena, they're using him as bait to get Bain. Elena's world stopped. Where? Warehouse District, shipping yards. I'm sending coordinates. But Elena, if we're doing this, it's now or never. Bain's euthanasia is in 8 hours. The animal control guard took a $50 bribe. Bain was in the last cage, scheduled for morning disposal, his eyes tracking Elena before she'd even rounded the corner. When she opened the door, he pressed against her legs, focused and ready, that strange vibration from his collar telling her he knew exactly what was coming. The shipping yard sprawled across 20 acres of stacked containers and forgotten cargo. Cold November rain turned everything slick and treacherous. Bain stopped at the perimeter, pressed his collar against Elena's palm, and suddenly she saw it, thermal signatures showing guards at 3 entry points, a clear path through the east side, and deeper in, a small heat signature. Child-sized. Leo. They moved like ghosts through the maze, the collar pulsing against her palm, painting pictures in her mind. Clear left. 2 guards right. Wait 3 seconds. Move now. Then lights blazed from every direction, pinning them in a kill box. Mrs. Vance. Silas Thorne's voice echoed through a loudspeaker. The dog for the boy. Simple exchange. You walk away, forget what you think you know, and I'll even throw in enough money for Leo's surgery. Maybe restore some vision. The cruelty of it, offering to fix what he'd broken. Or refuse, and the boy has an unfortunate accident. Foster care is dangerous, Mrs. Vance. Then she heard it. Leo's voice, small and terrified. Mommy? Bain? I'm scared. Something in Bain snapped. He bolted toward the warehouse with Elena clinging to his collar, and suddenly she was seeing through his eyes, his nose, his ears. The world exploded into impossible sensory information. Guards' positions marked by heartbeat and breath. And Leo's scent trail leading directly into the darkness. Inside, Leo stood in the center of an empty concrete floor under a single bulb. But Elena saw what her son couldn't. Tripwires at every exit, pressure plates beneath his feet, men in the catwalks with weapons trained on a blind 7-year-old. It's a trap, Elena gasped. I know, Leo said calmly. But Bain's coming. And Mommy, he's not just showing me where things are anymore. He's showing me what they are. The collar's vibration reached a crescendo. Bain positioned himself at Leo's feet, and suddenly Elena understood. He wasn't just carrying evidence. He was broadcasting it. 3 years of surveillance, illegal contracts, covered-up disasters, uploading to secured servers worldwide. Sarah Chen's voice crackled through Elena's phone. I'm getting everything. He's weaponizing himself. Thorne burst through the door, his corporate mask cracking. Stop the transmission. But his men stared at their screens, watching 3 years of corporate crime stream across every device, unstoppable and damning. Leo reached down, his fingers finding Bain's collar. My daddy told him to protect us. And he's still listening. Even now. The warehouse lights cut out, plunging them into the darkness that was Leo's entire world. And in that darkness, connected by a collar and a bond that transcended programming, the blind boy, his mother, and the weapon who'd learned to love them found their way home. The federal courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Elena sat beside Sarah Chen, watching Silas Thorne in the defendant's chair where she'd once sat powerless. Marcus's voice filled the room, 3 years dead but alive in Bain's neural recording. Building 7 is illegal weapons development. Thorne's selling military AI. I've documented everything. If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Then Thorne's voice, cold and businesslike. Initiate emergency protocol. Eliminate the witness. The explosion followed in Bain's sensory data. Heat signatures, pressure waves, Marcus's scent extinguishing in 14 seconds while Thorne watched from safety. And Leo's scream as shrapnel tore through the observation window, captured in audio so clear the courtroom flinched. 3 years of evidence played for 6 hours. By the time the prosecution rested, Thorne's lawyers had stopped objecting. Judge Morrison read the verdict, guilty on all counts. She looked at Elena. Mrs. Vance, this court owes you an apology that words cannot adequately express. Elena didn't want apologies. She wanted her son. Leo was returned that afternoon, running toward Bain at the courthouse entrance, the dog's tail wagging so hard his entire scarred body shook. The settlement came 6 weeks later. Full restitution, compensation, and a trust fund ensuring Leo would never want again. But what made Elena cry was the clause recognizing Bain as family, protected forever. No one could take him away again. The surgery was scheduled for spring. Dr. Reeves explained carefully, we can't guarantee full vision restoration, but there's potential for significant improvement. Leo listened, fingers buried in Bain's fur. Will it hurt, Bain? If I can see, will I still need him? Elena knelt beside him. Baby, you'll always need him. He's not just your eyes. He's your family. Surgery day arrived with soft sunlight through hospital windows. Leo wore a surgical gown too big for his frame. Bain refused to leave the bed despite nurses' suggestions. He stays, Elena said firmly, and no one argued. If I can see when I wake up, Leo asked quietly, what's the first thing I should look at? What do you want to see, baby? Bain's face. I want to see if he looks like I imagine. If his eyes are as kind as his heart. Leo's hand traced the collar one more time. And I want to see Mommy's face. Daddy said you had a smile that could light up the darkest room. As sedation took him under, Leo whispered, don't leave, Bain. Promise. The dog's soft whine was answer enough. 3 days later, Dr. Reeves stood ready to remove the bandages. There are no guarantees. You might see everything, nothing, or something in between. I understand, Leo said. But I already see everything that matters. The bandages came away. Leo blinked once, twice. His pupils contracted. His eyes found Elena's with impossible precision. Mommy, he whispered. Daddy was right. Your smile does light up the dark. Then his gaze dropped to Bain and tears streamed down his face. You're perfect. You're the most perfect thing I've ever seen. 6 months later, Elena watched Leo play in the park, his laughter carrying like music. Bain sat beside her, eyes never leaving the boy. You could rest now, Elena told him. You've done enough. But Bain's vigilant gaze never wavered. Some things weren't about missions or programming. Some things were simply about love. And sometimes that's all the miracle anyone needs.